The state legislature will convene this year to a challenging reality. Lawmakers must tackle the ongoing public health crisis, a struggling economy, and a dire budget outlook that could lead to state furloughs and layoffs. And as the situation surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic evolves, other issues on the agenda could be left in limbo. We'll hear from lawmakers and government watchdogs on plans to confront problems triggered by the virus. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha, I'm Daryl Huff. The start of the new year is unlike any we've encountered in our lifetime. And while the COVID-19 vaccine is being distributed, health concerns as well as economic fallout from the pandemic continue. The 31st session of the state legislature will convene on Wednesday. Veteran and newly elected lawmakers will be put to the test as they try to dig the state out of this unprecedented hardship. Our panel tonight includes lawmakers from the State House and Senate, as well as political watchdogs. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests, who are all appearing via the internet. Republican Representative Gene Ward has served in the State House for more than 20 years and is currently the minority leader. He represents Hawaii Kai and Kalama Valley on Oahu. Democratic Senator Jared Keahokalole was elected to the state Senate in 2018 after serving in the state House. He represents parts of Windward Oahu, including Kaneohe, Kailua, and Ahui Manu. Sandy Ma is the executive director of Common Cause Hawaii. The nonpartisan, nonprofit organization works to protect Hawaii's political process and uphold the values of democracy. And Chad Blair is the politics and opinion editor for civilbeat.org. As a reporter, he's tasked with covering how political decisions impact Hawaii's residents and communities. Now, let me start off talking to Representative Ward and Senator Keahokalole. What is it going to look like? What is the legislature going to look like this year? I mean, last year, it was all in the middle of a crisis because springtime, you tried to get started and then everything fell apart. This year, you've had some time to look ahead. What's it going to be like for yourselves and the public making decisions, going through committee hearings, and so on? Start with you, Representative Ward.
Daryl, we got 4 priorities, very serious, big priorities. First, we got to end the pandemic. We've got to get people vaccinated. We've got to get the vulnerable and the ages, and then we've got to get opening of the economy as the second thing. Then we got to help small businesses survive. And we've got to do things like plugging the big hole in the budget. So we've got social, economic, physical, and all kinds of things that we have never had before. We got almost a $6 billion deficit, in addition to $25 billion unfunded liabilities. So we're going to really have to sharpen our pencils, but if we don't open the economy, we'll never have the tax base in order to pay for the government, which is already having such a big hole in it.
So, yeah, but what I'm going to kind of get at, and Senator, why don't you jump at this? What's it going to be like for the public and for lawmakers? I mean, we have this traditional opening day, which we did actually have last year, with music and food and huge crowds. What do you see it being like this year?
It's going online. It's going to be a lot like this. Luckily, the public has gotten very accustomed to Zoom meetings. And that's essentially how business is going to take place. It's not safe to gather at the Capitol. This is part of why things went haywire last year, because there was a hesitancy on our part at the legislature to conduct business the way we always have and invite the public to come in and gather together. So proceedings will be done online via Zoom. Members of the public can register online, submit written testimony, but also register and come on Zoom and testify live, which I think is actually going to be an improvement because it allows access for members of the public who traditionally wouldn't be able to get to downtown Honolulu on a Tuesday or a Wednesday morning or afternoon to testify in person. The other thing I'll mention is that aside from the proceedings streaming live online and members being able to testify remotely, they are being archived on YouTube. So this is going to be the first session ever where people are going to be able to go back and look at video of the different hearings that took place, see the votes, see the testimony, the questions, and really go back and watch what happened in real time.
Sandy Ma from Common Cause, that's a yin and yang kind of look at this, right? Do you think that ultimately we've reached a more positive place where there's actually easier public access, or are you concerned about public access?
Thank you for that. Common Cause has always supported remote testimony, and we are glad that we are moving towards remote testimony and more public access for the people, especially people on neighbor islands, especially for people who cannot travel and cannot take time off to participate in our government. We are, however, concerned with people who do not have computers or who do not have Wi-Fi. That is a great concern, but we are very pleased that our legislative branch of government is making remote testimony and remote access available during the session. We have heard that our Wi-Fi is being improved, our broadband is being improved at the Capitol to make this available. We want to make sure that our disability community is able to participate fully in this 2021 session. But there are still concerns about how people are notified of legislative hearings, are being able to participate fully. So we want to make sure that everyone has equal access to participate in government. And so, but it is a step in the right direction and to keep people safe during these times, definitely.
Hey, Chad, as a journalist, as a reporter, what's it been like covering the legislature in the last few months? And do you share the same positive reflection on this? Do you feel like it's as good for a reporter as maybe it was before?
Well, everybody knows what Zoom fatigue is, and boy, we have had it in spades these last, it's hard to believe it's almost a year now. You know, on the one hand, there has been some benefit. Our legislature really has been behind the times in being able to be accessed entirely by the state. I mean, it's hard enough to get a parking spot in the basement parking lot of the Capitol, but if you're on a neighbor island and you got to fly over and testify in person, you got to catch a plane back. I mean, that stuff is just crazy. So on the one hand, there has been some improvement, but remember, the governor, because of his emergency proclamation, also suspended the state sunshine law and the public records law. And that, particularly that second thing, the public records law, is very frustrating for us, meaning reporters or people in the public can't get access to documents to find out what's going on in a timely fashion. But
Chad, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just curious, particularly as a journalist, how has it changed? Is it easier or harder to cover, and is it easier or harder to make the connections with individual lawmakers that you need a lot of times to work off the record and so on?
Well, as much as I like seeing what people's living rooms and dens look like, you don't have this. You can't look around the conference committee room and see who's in the room, what lobbyist, what other special interest. You can't go out in the hallways and see who's talking to who. You can't see who's walking into whose office. And as a reporter, that stuff is essential to doing your job. Daryl, you of all people know that, and that has been lost. The Capitol is still closed, and even though there is some media access that is being allowed, it's nothing like covering it before. I worry about that as a journalist.
Hey, Gene Ward, I don't want to bring ageism into this, but you and I aren't that far apart. As a lawmaker, how has it been for you in terms of keeping track of all the things you need to keep track of as a Republican with a very small caucus? You know, how has it been for you? Is this electronic world a benefit, or is it a problem?
I think I would join the notion of a COVID fatigue or COVID confusion, COVID conundrums. I mean, it kind of screws everybody up. We're used to social contact, eyeball to eyeball contact. I'm going to miss you, Chad. He would be the only sole guy sitting up in the balcony with his computer. I mean, consistently, it was kind of like a fixture. He would be sitting there typing away out on one of the call benches. I think we'll go back to that someday, but in a way, it's kind of, a shout out to the neighbor islands, I think, is really worth underscoring, because when they pay $200-300 to come in with renting the car, and then you said no parking, and then they sit 2 hours in a meeting and they get 2 or 3 minutes to give their spiel. This is a great boon for the neighbor islands, no question about it. But what we're going to have is all of our representatives on the floor. I don't know, Senator, what you guys are going to do. Everybody's going to be sitting on the floor, social distances, and they've got petitions of plexiglass between all the desks. So we're going to kind of do floor stuff as usual. As I said earlier, only freshmen will have their parents up on opening day. Otherwise, it's going to be strictly on the floor, live with each other, but otherwise we'll be in hearing rooms and all have a computer in front of us, and all testimony, including directors of departments, et cetera, will all be remote. That's probably going to be hard to get used to, but I think for the session and what we're going through economically, it's probably the most efficient way we can do it.
You know, just for the general public out there, you know, those of us who've been following the legislature and doing this have gotten pretty facile at keeping track of multiple hearings and so on. But for the general public, what I'd suggest, if you're really interested in following up on the legislature, take a look at the legislative webpage. It is actually quite excellent. There's a lot of stuff on there. You can look at prior hearings. You can look at testimony. You can look at hearing notices that are coming up. You can look at live broadcasts, where they are. It's very well organized. So I encourage people who are interested in the legislature to take a look at that. And maybe it'll encourage people to actually go and access the legislature, whereas before, like Chad was saying, it was a closed box. It was very difficult to get in there. What's your advice to folks out there about accessing the legislature? Sandy Ma, you know, what do you encourage people to do?
I encourage people to still make contact with their legislators, call the legislative offices. I know Senator is very active on Facebook, holds often Facebook Live streams often. I've followed him on Facebook and watched his broadcasts on Facebook Live. He's very engaged with his constituents. Please make contact with your legislators, call their office, email them, reach out. We do that often. We reach out to our legislators. I do want to go back to a point I think Chad made where he said that the Capitol is closed. And you can still make appointments, but some legislators do still hold in-person meetings. Common Cause is concerned that sometimes in-person meetings are still held, and that could open the door to some lobbyists or some people going into the legislative offices and having some kind of influence at the legislature that the public cannot have access to because the legislature, the Capitol is closed. So we want to make sure that there is.
Let me. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's awkward with this world for me to interrupt. I apologize, but are you saying that there are certain people right now that are at the Capitol who are not legislators, who are taking advantage of the fact that some legislators will let them in the door when the rest of the public is excluded from the building? There's certain insiders are getting that?
I don't know. I'm just raising that concern. I am raising that concern that some meetings could be held in person.
Daryl, the speaker told us today, if we sign in who the person is, we can have guests in the building. So Sandy's kind of correct. We can have guests who are lobbyists. I'm not sure that that's always going to be the case, but we have guest privileges, whatever that's going to result in.
Senator Keokalole, do you agree that might become an issue, given the way things are operating down there now?
You know, potentially it is, as they say. I mean, at least for the Senate, I am allowed to invite guests to have in-person meetings in our office. You know, we were pretty aggressive when this all, was thrust on us in March. We shut down our office and went virtual. My office manager, who deserves a ton of credit, our office line is forwarded to her house line. So she gets calls all the time. And so we try and just make sure that we're as accessible as possible. I don't mind meeting constituents if it's one individual out in community. We were doing that before. I have been trying to approach this, this COVID world as similarly as we did before the pandemic, and just trying to find ways to make myself accessible to our constituents, and then just deal with the Zoom. because we just have to adjust, and people get used to it. And so we're just going to have to do that with the legislative session. I've tried to stress to constituents, to other members in the legislature, we should expect things to go awry, because they will eventually. This is the first time we're ever trying this, but once we get through it, I think we'll emerge for the better. And I think this is really going to be a blessing for us in the long term.
Okay, speaking of emerging from the better, we are facing somewhere between a $1.5 billion shortfall. I'm going to throw this question out to everyone, and I'll let you start, Chad, because I know you've been covering it. How bad is it? How bad is the budget situation now? Furloughs we've been talking about, layoffs we've been talking about, hundreds of teachers potentially. You've talked about potential tax increases that may be necessary. How bad is it, Chad? Why don't you start?
Not going to sugarcoat it. It's very bad, but I would say things changed dramatically today with the President-elect Biden introducing this $1.9 trillion stimulus package. Remember that the Democrats now control both chambers as well as the White House, and there's a lot of money in there. I haven't read the proposal in detail, but it looks very promising. And the hope is, at least from the administration, and I'm sure from Rep. Ward and the senator, that maybe they're not going to have to face as serious a deal with furloughs and tax increases and getting rid of tax credits. This is all in flux. A lot can happen. But I would say, at least if I can at least say something positive, that stimulus proposal from the incoming administration is a sign of, I think, a little optimism.
So, Representative Ward, what Chad is saying is it's a good thing for Hawaii that Democrats got elected. Do you agree with that?
I was going to say, I joined the optimism that he has, not because of what's going on with the Democrats in Washington, but full confidence in what our Sylvia Luke in finance is doing, closing down empty positions, taking people who retire, not necessarily filling those positions. We've got hundreds of special funds that are sitting there with lots of money in them. There's all kinds of things that we are doing, I think, rather creatively. We're borrowing a lot of money, of course, at the same time, but we've got to be able to juggle this around for what otherwise you said 1.5 billion. That's per year, Daryl, 1.5 billion per year, which means it goes up, to 6 billion as we talk about for a 4-year span. And we've got to have a balanced budget. But look, 50% of all of our budget in the legislature is general excise taxes. 25% are withholding taxes. If we don't get the economy going, there's not going to be any budget that we can do, and we're just going to live off of fumes, basically. So, yeah, I'm optimistic. All of the furloughs and the other things are temporarily on the side. That's not something that is immediate, but if push comes to shove, there may have to be cuts, there may have to be furloughs. But look, we went through this with Lingle in 2008, 2009. We made it through. We said, here's the essential services. Here are the things that we must do, and the other things we postpone. And, of course, we're still catching up with some of the things that we did have painfully cut, but I think we can get through it. And right now we're at a good position, as Chad just said.
Senator Kaloli, do you agree that perhaps we can get through this without the furloughs, without tax increases?
I don't know. It really is too early. I agree with Chad. It's too early to tell. We're sort of waiting with bated breath here on the breakouts from the latest federal stimulus package that just passed before the end of last year, because as chair of health, we're going to be looking at the federal dollars that are coming in for the COVID response, because we need to budget. The administration budgeted money to deal with the pandemic going forward, and that was general excise tax revenue, that was income tax revenue. And so if some of those operations, contact tracing, the quarantine program, rent relief, if some of these programs are going to be covered by federal dollars that are coming in, then that gives us more flexibility to try and plug the gaps elsewhere. The Council on Revenue just met at the end of the year as well, and they upgraded their revenue projection. We are subject to these fiscal constraints, and so we just have to operate within those boundaries. They're likely to change if the vaccination plan proceeds as we hope it will, and people line up to take the vaccine as we expect them to, that could change the situation as well. So we just need to be flexible and willing to communicate to our constituents about what's going on at any given point, because it's going to change.
Sandy Buff from Common Cause, when you end up in a situation where you're facing a big budget shortfall like this, what is it that you and the people that you work with worry the most about?
Social services, we're concerned about that. We're concerned, social services, our coalition partners are mostly concerned about social services.
You know, there was a interesting housing summit that took place yesterday, and there was grave concern there among the nonprofits, because the first thing that usually happens is the grants get cut. The stuff that doesn't fund state workers, the nonprofits that get grants to provide direct service are often the first ones that get cut. Yes, Sandy?
We're worried about, the most vulnerable amongst us. They just cannot be stressed enough. The most vulnerable amongst us really don't have access to the powers, and they're often without a voice, and they're most often the first on the chopping block. And so, homeless services, mental health services, we're really concerned about that. In 2007 with the the homeless, the houseless, they were most immediately impacted with the housing situation, the housing crisis. And so we are really, really concerned about that.
So we're all concerned. One of the quick fixes, get gambling going, get marijuana, get hard drugs, and all these quick fixes, or tax the super rich. Those are going to be some of the things that we're going to have to wrestle with. Particularly, we know we got a casino for the HHL, we've got the gambling, we got marijuana. Even someone in the Senate, Jared, is going to say, take hard drugs, heroin, and meth, and all of the hard drugs, and make it from a felony to a misdemeanor. So we're going to be playing around with a lot of quick revenue stuff, but in the long run, I think we'll go back to normal. But got to diversify the economy.
Okay, so you just brought up a bunch of cans of worms there, Representative Ward. So let me give
that's how
Senator
tough our
Akil
job is,
Kalole.
Daryl. We deal with a lot of worms and fish.
Senator Akil Kalole, you're the one that did step up to help Hawaiian Homes, put that casino concept, keep it in front of the legislature. I want to get to a lot of this later on again, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about these kind of fixes that happen. But I don't think that what you're talking about for DHHL, the Hawaiian Homelands Program, is really considered a quick fix.
No, it's not. And it's actually an extension of the operational philosophy that the Lingle administration put together, which is to defund the department and allow the commission to generate revenue on the non-residential homestead lands. Well, the reason we have intend to put forward the gaming legislation is introduced every year at the legislature. Lottery legislation is introduced, and as Representative Ward said, there are going to be a million different ideas thrown out about how to close the revenue picture. And what I did not want to have happen is that we lose focus on this commitment that we need to keep to the 28,000 Native Hawaiians on the Hawaiian Homes wait list that we committed to take care of when we became a state. It was a condition of statehood. Half of them are over 60. And I've been this is my 7th year. Over the 6 years, we have steadily increased operational monies to the department. And I really had to think about whether that was all worth it, because here we are in another downturn, and that's going to get wiped out. It's very difficult to do home development, and we know this because of the affordable housing issue in general, unless you have a sustained large amount of funding to put in place to line up entitlements and do infrastructure and do planning. So I want this discussion to be had, and I don't want it to just be about gaming. It needs to be about our commitment to do what it's going to take to get those folks, most of them kupuna, housed before they pass away. It needs to stay on the agenda, along with the other issues that we're going to have to wrestle with, which includes, like Representative Ward said, there are many little shadowy corners of government that we need to take this opportunity to shine a light on and figure out whether we need to keep that stuff going. Program X in state government probably was created for a purpose that's no longer valid in 2020 in Hawaii. It's probably underfunded and probably not necessarily achieving its purpose in the first place. And so we need to take good hard looks at everything and figure out what we can get rid of, what we can consolidate, and what we can start making work the right way, especially now that we're all just changing so rapidly just to survive.
Okay, let me. I want to start. My orange cards with questions are starting to come in fairly rapidly, and I want to get through a number of them. One is a follow-up on part of our conversation, anonymous from Kailua, to verify only the invited members of the public can meet with elected officials. Can you clarify that, Representative Ward or Senator Representative Ward? What is the rule, and what is the practice of most legislators right now?
It's in the formative stages, but it's basically a guest policy. A guest policy means that there's a relationship or a request between whoever the person is and the office to get their name and their credential to then put on a list so when they show up, they will be able to get into the building. Now, I don't know if there's so many that you can do or any category of individuals, but the fact is, on a guest basis, there's going to be otherwise people in the Capitol. If you're not an employee, you can't get in. If you're an employee, you get in. If you're a guest of an employee or a representative, you can get in. That's as much as I know. Jared, maybe you know more detail on the Senate.
It's kind of fun. I can see both Chad and Sandy kind of looking at it like very cynically, like, tell me this again.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
I have been invited to speak with legislators in person, and that's when I was like, boy, I want to make sure that I'm not stepping over any lines here. But I have been invited to speak to legislators in person at the closed Capitol. So I've been put on a guest list more than once. So I just want to clarify that, disclose that.
Okay. Chad, what do you think?
Thank you for that, Sandy.
Do you have a concern about that practice? I can look at your face kind of going, I think that
He wants to get in also.
the best medicine for that would be those lists have to be public.
Yeah, exactly. Can we see the visitors' logs, please? Can we follow up with a phone call or two? And look, I understand there is a lot of sensitive issues that people want to talk about with their lawmakers, their representatives, and there are doors there and you can close them. And I get that. Remember, the Sunshine Law doesn't apply to the state legislature either, which is a frustration. But that is the concern that I think Sandy was really trying to bring up. Who is getting invited? Exactly. Are they the lobbyists, the PACs, these people with a lot of money to sway opinion? Or is it the folks representing Catholic Charities and others that are trying to help people? That's my concern.
Just to put a period on that discussion, Dwight from Hilo says, politicians are using the coronavirus to shut out the public, but let in developers. He also messaged the city council over there. Another question from Nikos on Twitter, will the legislature consider revenue increases for working families? I'm thinking that might be another minimum wage effort or tax cuts to help families. Senator Keakololi, any chance there for help for working families?
I'm not sure. There are a number of different ways that we can address this. One of the big ones that Representative Ward mentioned earlier is small businesses. This latest stimulus act did not address the unemployment trust fund deficit that we have to confront. And so there are going to be serious implications to the premiums that small businesses pay as a result. And so that's going to be one of the things that we're going to need to address. Otherwise, you're going to see, a real spike in costs that the small business community is going to have to deal with. We know as a function of the federal money that was passed in December that there are going to be monies for social service support, principally around rent relief and I think food security. So we're waiting for the details on that so that we can do the coordination to get that money out. The good thing about what happened at the end of the year is the federal government really relaxed the restrictions on how the money needs to be spent so that they were able to deploy it quickly. We're just waiting to see how that all breaks out so that we can make the according so we can make budget adjustments accordingly and get that information out to the community.
Representative Ward, this is a question directly for you on the economy. What is your position on the economy if we cannot restore tourism? I think that's a diversification question. Go ahead.
I was going to footnote what previous points the senator made. I think there's going to be a robust discussion about the minimum wage, family leave, but I think they're going to get postponed. There'll be a good discussion. There may even be one coming from the national level. I think the Biden administration is. The question is, what are we going to do about the economy? Are we going to jump away and push tourism aside? No, we've got to do as much as we can to revive tourism, even though we've got only that in the military. But my sense is we've always talked about diversifying the economy, but we've let it kind of become a subtonal, no one cares about it, you just say it because it sounds good. I think Ariyoshi was the only governor who really got serious about the diversification of the economy. I've always pushed forward 4 things. Chad, you guys have promoted easily. The 4 things that I talked about is, one is we becoming the Hollywood of the Pacific. We are a natural to develop. It's almost $1 billion, and it could be even more than $1 billion. Hollywood of the Pacific gives the ISFA Center and the Inouye Center for Asia Pacific Security Studies. We can become the Geneva of the Pacific with more conferences because of space travel, space tourism. We've got the launch capacity to go up and give the thrill. We can be that as a diversity. And we also the sports center of the Pacific. We've got a stadium that we're rebuilding. We don't even give naming rights. The problem is, Daryl, we don't have enough entrepreneurial spirit to diversify. We don't see these economic niches that we can do. They say, well, we can do ag. Well, if you don't do value-added ag, I mean, you can't make money doing taro. That's the reality of it.
Let me add, Chad, you've heard these kinds of speeches for many years. There's kind of many ideas thrown out at once, yet what the pandemic exposed was our economy is as vulnerable and monolithic as it ever has been. What's your analysis of this situation in terms of economic diversification? Is it really a reality, or is it just something that they'll talk about until tourism's providing plenty of money?
You know, Daryl, you can go back to the 1960s and you can read studies and papers that say exactly what Gene just said. And I've been hearing about diversification forever, but the reality is it's tourism, it's construction, it's the U.S. military, and we have depended on that for so long because it's really never really been interrupted. Yeah, there was the 2008 fiscal crisis. Yes, there was the bubble bursting from Japan. But it's a lot of talk, a lot of hot air, frankly, and we have never come close to even replicating that kind of industry, particularly tourism, the dollars they bring. By the way, real quickly, minimum wage, I should point out that the president-elect has proposed a $15 federal minimum wage. Ours is still at $10.10 an hour. I don't think there's going to be talk about that. They're worried about hurting businesses that are frankly going out of business right now. So I'm afraid that's going to table that unless there's a dramatic turnaround economically.
Well, but I mean, if a federal minimum wage would be automatic in Hawaii, then you wouldn't have an option. I'm assuming, right?
My understanding is that applies to federal jobs. That doesn't apply. That each state decides its own minimum wage. That's why it varies so much dramatically.
Senator, you know, when it comes to diversification of the economy, you end up having to make hard choices at the legislature, right? You can't just say, we're going to do this thing. You have to then offer tax credits or land or something in order to incentivize these organizations. Do you see anything like that coming, or do you think this year we're going to be mostly plastering over this budget hole?
I think it's very difficult. You know, for accounting purposes, we treat a tax credit the same way we treat, you know, an appropriation. It's red ink on the budget. It's going to be very difficult for us to hold on to the credits in the budget now when we're looking at furloughing teachers, right? It's all about what's going to happen this session is going to be all about what the public is going to be willing to tolerate. People are tired of this virus. They are tired of not being able to gather. They are tired of not being able to work and go out. And so we're going to need to figure out how to balance, like Sandy said, all of the social services that we know are going to have major negative consequences if are cut. and also the vital things that we need to do that we haven't traditionally had to even worry about, like all of this pandemic response, like the Safe Travels program and contact tracing. So, you know, at this point, I think when it comes to economic development, we need to, what I've come to believe is instead of picking winners and losers, what we should really be trying to do on the government side is focus on education and talent development, and then go in and find the infrastructure that needs to be done to help all of our local businesses be competitive and to encourage innovation to happen, to encourage our local businesses to innovate, to survive, but also to expand and to foster the kinds of business development that will keep us competitive in the global economy. Things like broadband, right? We are trying right now, there's a furious effort to get broadband access extended out into rural communities, but we also need to ramp up capacity in the urban core. And what we know from business activity is there's sort of an insatiable demand. That is one of the few things where if you build it, they will come and they will use it. And so whatever we can do to help businesses that are alive and trying to survive right now stay competitive, I think that's the short-term way to go. But in the long run, it does help build that entrepreneurial spirit and culture that we need to foster that Representative Ward was talking about.
You know, if I could just throw it, oh, go ahead, Gene, sorry.
A case in point, something is right in front of our nose right now in Hawaii, and that's a new pharmaceutical industry. Let me give a shout out to what Oceanit is doing. Patrick Sullivan has a spit in a cup, 10 minutes for the test, $20, and he has approached so many people that has CARES money coming out their ears. He can start a pharmaceutical industry and get this thing all over the world, particularly for our own people, beginning in the schools and making people safe because they've been tested. And we're sitting on our hands, and we talk about, well, we got a lot of ideas, they're pie in the sky. No, this guy is real, he's doing it, he says he's on the 11th hour of FDA approval. And we told Patrick Sullivan, yeah, we'll come back when you got FDA approval. We should be lining up the procurement process, making it conditional upon the approval. And that's why I said the entrepreneurial spirit is missing in the state, and we've got to get that. That's why I'm hoping Glenn Giardi in the city and county is going to start picking with stuff that's economically viable rather than sitting on our hands.
I just want to circle back very briefly. You know, my son's in a software business, and I asked him, well, what do you think is the next big thing that's going to happen that's really going to change the world, right? He said the last thing was the smartphone. And I said, well, what's the next thing? He said, universal broadband. He said, that is where you get incredible power to the people out there. And Sandy Ma, you were nodding away on that. Do you think that the broadband issue is something that they should really focus on? Because that might not cost that much taxpayer dollars. It's facilitating something, isn't it?
I'm sorry, were you asking me? You kind of faded out a little.
No,
or is it just...
the idea of infrastructure improvement that helps us do things better, helps reach people and help people. And the idea was, you know, better broadband everywhere. You know, do you think as someone who represents the public that would be a major improvement for our society?
It's definitely needed, especially on the islands where interconnectivity is required to function. Yes, we need broadband. We need government assistance, government support for broadband, for public access, to function in society now these days. I mean, we've seen with COVID and homeschooling, our kids don't have you know, broadband to learn for remote learning. So yes, definitely that is something Senator has said is definitely necessary. So whatever we could do to support that. I am not a tech person, so probably I'm not the one to be answering that question. But yes, we support that. So yes.
Let me get to another question from Paul from Manoa. Tax increase, no. Borrow, even bonds to fill the temporary deficit. Do not add a big tax we will not get rid of. But we talked a little bit about taxes, but also, are there other innovative ways of raising money? I spoke with Carl Bonham from UHERO. He says, we've got so much land. The state has so much land. They should sell some of it, you know, and that would promote economic development. Senator Keokalole, do you feel like people have the stomach? I mean, as a native Hawaiian, selling land always is problematic in terms of philosophy, but do you think that something like that, looking at state lands and selling them and distributing them and getting them into businesses' hands, is a good idea?
No, I don't. Especially if they're ceded lands. To go back to his question though, one of the things that's come up when we talk about revenue generation, because revenue generation through economic development is important. There's going to be a lot of attention on it. It's hard, as Chad said. It's difficult, and it's not guaranteed. And we've put forward money in the past that has not resulted in the type of business activity that we want. But the other thing he pointed out is borrowing money to go into debt. And I just want to make it clear, because there's been confusion about this. The state of Hawaii is required to submit a balanced budget. We cannot go into debt like some other states like California, and we cannot print money like the federal government. We have a debt ceiling that we need to meet when it comes to borrowing for even infrastructure that's going to be impacted this year because revenues have gone down. And we've also had to, the governor has borrowed money on the private market. He borrowed short-term money from Bank of America, like the state equivalent of a payday loan, which limits our debts, our borrowing cap even more. So I don't want to create the false perception that there's money to spend and it's just about being as expeditious with the money as possible. We have real hard decisions coming, and there's not going to be enough dollars available for us to continue to do everything we've been doing.
Do you think this is another question from Twitter, why not legalize adult use cannabis? Even a small market like Alaska now sees $20 million in tax revenue. Do you see a temptation there, Representative Ward? Is there?
These are the magic elixirs, which some places have tried them, like California, where you get gambling, as for example, on the native tribes, and then you fund your education budget. But let us be very frank. We in the legislature will then back out the executive branch amount of money, and then the money from gambling or from weed or whatever will then just shrink when the economy shrinks. So it's a precarious, it's kind of a slippery slope. And then when you start doing these things, you get dependent upon them. And I think we're probably have enough psychotropic things going on in the society that are now de facto legal, not de jure, informally, as when we did, for example, the marijuana decriminalization, or let's say making almost recreational marijuana. The police actually came into the Capitol and said, if it's 3 grams or less, we don't even do anything with the people. And that was basically what the bill was. So then,
yeah, because it was good policy, Gene. That's why Gene is right, though. The magic elixir temptation is a real worry, at least for me. We cannot. The public should not be misled that these magic elixirs, like he's saying, are going to plug our budget hole. We should do them if they're good policy. We should do them because it makes sense.
Okay, let me ask Sandy Ma from Common Cause and Chad Blair. Okay, so let's put shiny objects aside. What are the things that you folks feel really do need to be addressed other than just the budget shortfall, the COVID response, economic diversity? What are the issues out there that are hanging that need to be fixed? Sandy Ma, do you have any thoughts on that?
So our Common Cause priorities and priority issues in 2021 are some voting reforms. They do not have any appropriations or monetary dollar amounts attached to them. And we would like to see some ethics legislation that did not pass from the 2020 legislative session. One bill was vetoed by governor. So we have some small measures that we would like to see move in the 2021 legislative session. We would like to see automatic voter registration adopted. We think that it would support vote by mail. Automatic voter registration is when someone interacts with the county DMV, such as get a state ID or get a driver's license or update their state ID or update their driver's license. They can opt out of registering to vote if they want to. And that data, if they do not opt out to register to vote, that data would automatically be transferred to the county elections office, and then they would be registered to vote. And then so their voter registration information would be automatically updated. So for the next the voting cycle, the next election cycle, the vote by mail ballot would be sent to their correct address. And so that would be voter security. And it would, it's a small thing, but it's a big thing. We have more updated voter records, more, more ballots going to the correct address. And so voter security, good thing for everyone.
I think it's sort of ironic that despite the president's complaints about mail-in voting, ultimately because of the complaints, they basically proved that it was virtually fraud-free. Chad Blair.
But Daryl, you can do mail-in voting very poorly if you don't know what it is. We in Hawaii are very experienced. We've done a great job. My district was voting over 60% over the last 2 or 3 elections.
Okay.
But if you don't have the signature on file to match the signature on the ballot, it's too loosey-goosey. And if you don't have it where, in effect, these people are registered voters, in other words, they did this ad hoc stuff. It was too quick and too strict to be actually bona fide all mail-in voting.
Thanks, Representative. I want to give Chad Blair, though, a chance. What do you think are issues outside of the big 3 or 4 that we've talked about that might get a serious look or might be sort of a distraction this year as we go through it?
It's hard to believe, but a year ago, there was a very ambitious package that had not only the governor, but both the House and Senate, as well as business interests and others, really to deal with affordable housing, dealing with education, pre-K in particular. Paid Family Leave Act was something that was proposed, minimum wage, others. And of course, that all went kablooey once COVID came to town, but it was really rather impressive. Those issues have not gone away. They are still around. Remember that the Diamond Head shooting, there was going to be a lot of legislation introduced to help our police officers to crack down even further on gun control. We got to deal with that. But you know what? If any of those have an appropriation attached to them, a dollar figure, that's going to not make that possible. That's why Sandy is pointing to items that can be passed that don't require money attached to them, or very much money anyway.
So cost of living is the only one you forgot. That was part of the package.
Thank you, Gene. Yeah, very good point.
Senator Kehokalole, any thoughts on what issues might pop up that actually can get a hearing with all this other priorities?
Like I've been saying, I really do think at its core, even though we're moving this legislative session to remote access and online, fundamentally legislating is not going to change very much. These committee chairs still run the hearing, have all the power to set the agenda and put things to the vote. The hearing times, there aren't going to be as many hearings at one time, but the amount of time at the hearing is going to be relatively similar. It might get a little hectic during conference. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to fundamentally work. So it might actually slow down the process, and there are not likely to be as many bills passing. But I think what you guys are saying is right. If there's a statutory change or a policy that we've been working on for a while, especially the stuff that was moving but just got lost in the wash because of the coronavirus and there's no money attached, then I think those issues are likely to get done because we still do need to govern. We still do need to legislate. And Representative Ward will attest, there are many, many bills that pass every year that everyone supports because there's a certain amount of governing that just has to happen. And we all recognize that. We need to make sure that those bills pass. Tax conformity is one of them that we always do every year because we need to make sure that stuff works.
And they're not Republican or Democrat bills, they're just bills for managing the household, make sure that things happen. So there's not polarity.
So just Zach from Twitter, we must be a world leader in sustainable development and renewable energies. We need to look at the past and imagine a future in harmony with the INA. Is energy diversification, renewable energy, is there more that can be done there? I guess is what he's asking.
We're one of the national leaders in terms of solar, in terms of taking ourselves out of fossil fuel by, is it 2040?
2045.
Sorry?
2045 is the
2045, okay.
renewable. Yeah.
And those are, probably achievable with high goals that the rest of the world is envious of. Can we do better than that? I would think probably so. I would like to see eventually everybody having a solar a plant on their own house or underneath them with batteries, the way that the PC replaced the huge mainframe computer. Now we've got mainframe HECO development, but I'd like to see it down in a smaller individual household. That's probably not something that's immediate, but there's many, many more things that we can do than we're doing now in Hawaii.
Let me throw out this question from a viewer, Nancy in Waikiki. How concerned are the representatives about the FBI warnings about violence? Asking, do you know anything about our homegrown member of the Proud Boys, his following? But I'd like to broaden that question out a little bit in that, you know, we've seen such a fundamental exposure of the divisions in our country, and even in Hawaii, we see more active membership of sort of the Trump following, you know, being much more visible. How do you think that what's happening now in this country will affect Hawaii? Let me start with you, Chad. What do you think? Are we seeing this movement come ashore in sort of a scary way?
Well, once something like that does happen, what happened at the U.S. Capitol, if that happens at the state capitol, we're going to have to accept the fact that we really aren't all that different, that we're not that exceptional. I personally feel very disappointed that Nick Oakes, the legislative candidate in Waikiki who ran and lost to Adrian Tam, was part of that movement. It also shames me that he was a UH Manoa journalism graduate. And that really troubles me. Yes, he was. He went to school at UH.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did, but I think because I
You're going to repeat that over and over again. You're going to repeat that over and over again.
But I do think, I pray that it's isolated, that the Nick Oakes of the world are rare, that we don't have that kind of output here. But I think everybody had a wake-up call, an historic wake-up call on January the 6th, that it can happen here. And by that, I mean the United States, of which we are a part.
Sandy Ma, what's your thoughts about it? I'm sure, like everyone else, you had a real deep chill when you saw what was happening in the Capitol.
Yes, I mean, we were, our national organization was deeply disturbed by it. So were we in Hawaii. I do want to say that Common Cause Hawaii ran an election protection program for the elections that happened in 2020. We did see some really disturbing incidents around the elections here, which really chilled us. On election day, on November 3rd, we did see evidence of people going up to voters waiting in line, you know, threatening violence, saying that you will be killed, threatening people waiting in line to vote, people wearing Proud Boys shirts with Trump flags. We had these long lines and they went right up to them and threatened violence. And it was horrifying. We had to call the police. These were our volunteer election protection members witnessing this, and it was unpleasant and scary for our volunteers. And we like to say we're different. We like to say we live aloha, but it, you know, this radicalization, you know, came to our shores. And so we're glad that, you know, precautions are being taken at the Capitol. We're glad that nothing has happened, but we don't like to see these barricades up. You know, it is, you know, the people's house. You know, it is open for a reason. Everyone should be welcome and everyone should be able to go up, but it's just sad and shameful, like Chad said.
For the two legislators, first, let me start with you, Representative Ward. Are you? What are your concerns? Are you a little worried about violence?
Right. Well, you know, in abundance of caution, they had to do what the FBI has given every state capitol, a warning that there could be violence. Now, what we had in the House today was a security briefing that said there's no credible threat for the state capitol, but they are prepared if there is any. Now, remember last summer, we kind of normalized violence, the courthouses and the other places that where statues were brought down. It kind of flowed over, but remember when Black Lives Matter did their parade and their protest here, everything was peaceful.
Yeah,
let me differentiate ourselves from Hawaii in a way that's unique.
Representative, I want to give Senator Kalole
okay,
the last.
Sorry.
We've only got about 30 seconds.
My sense is nothing is going to happen And anybody who is saying that they're a Trump supporter and they're violent, they're crazy, and they have no part of what the movement is.
Senator, your own fears and your feeling about this movement.
Well, so I think what Representative Ward said is evidence that Hawaii is a little bit different, right? He just came out and said it, and so I'm hopeful that things are going to be fine. You know, I came out and called for whoever from Hawaii that participated in Washington to be investigated to see if they were part of the planning effort that resulted in violence, because those acts took place likely in Hawaii, and we got some calls to the office. You know, Senate members are going to be allowed to participate remotely from home.
Okay. Senator,
so I think it's going to be safe. I'm hopeful that it will be.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panel, and mahalo to you folks at home for joining us tonight. And we want to thank our guests, Republican Representative Gene Ward, Democratic Senator Jared Keohakalole, Executive Director for Common Cause Hawaii, Sandy Ma, and Civil Beat's Political Opinion Editor, Chad Blair. Next week on Insights, more on the far-reaching effects of the pandemic. We'll focus on higher education with a show called COVID-19 College Impact. Please join us then. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.